Hello, and welcome to this video on writing your first Apex trigger. Today we're going to do an illustration of how to write an Apex trigger for a fairly simple use case. The use case we're going to look at today is around the cases object. What we're going to do is we're going to put it into a Kanban view. So right now here we are looking at our open cases in a table view. And if I switch it to Kanban, and I've got the Kanban set so that we're looking across different statuses of the case. So the idea here is I can drag a case from new into working, and that'll actually update the case's status, or escalated or closed. Notice all of these cases are assigned to a system user. What I'd like to happen is if I drag it from new into working, that it automatically gets assigned to me. This would be an easy way for my users to just assign themselves a case by looking at what's in the new column, dragging it over, and automatically getting assigned. Right now, that doesn't happen. It's still assigned to the system user. So that's what we're going to write a trigger for. Okay, so over here in the developer console, we're going to just create a Apex trigger, new Apex trigger, and the name we're going to call it case trigger. You could call it anything you want, but it's kind of a good idea to keep it associated to the object that we're dealing with. And we're going to just pick the case object. And we can see it creates a case trigger. And here's the syntax that we didn't have to type in because the system did it for us. Trigger, case trigger on case. And it's defaulting to before insert. Now, I'm not going to go too in depth on all the options here. There will be another video that will explore that topic. But what we want to do, since our use case is we're simply doing an update to the case status, insert's not where we want to be. We want this to happen on an update. So I could simply change this to an update, or I'll just for update. I can just add it in here. Oftentimes you'll see lots of case conditions here. Again, I'm not going to go into the details. But what this does for us, the before update, this allows us to modify the object before it actually gets committed to the database. And that's what the before stands for. Before this case is updated, we're going to do something. Sometimes you want to do things after it's updated, but in this case, since we're modifying the object itself, we want to do it before the update. And then once we're in the trigger, we can verify that our logic is only going to run before update. So we use the trigger system variables to accomplish that. You could say, well, if we just get rid of before insert, we know will always be before update. But the problem is, down the road, someone else may modify this trigger and add other conditions. So it's a good idea to just be really explicit about when your logic is running. So here, we're specifying that it's going to be before an update. So this won't happen on insert, just on an update. We could put all of our logic here, but it's a better practice to actually do the bulk of your logic in another class. You don't want your triggers to just be full of logic, because sometimes it can get unwieldy. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new class to handle the actual trigger logic. And we're just going to call it a case trigger handler. Typically within a trigger handler, you would have different methods on the different times that you're running. In this case, it's going to be before update, just like we specified in the trigger. We'll create a constructor just to make sure that works. make it public so we have no problems accessing it. And then we'll create our handler. All right. So here in the trigger code, we will make a reference to that. I'm actually going to instantiate the handler outside of the if statement. And we'll call our before update. Now, of course, we need to pass some things into before update. So what we're going to pass in within the trigger, we've got a couple of other variables that we could use in addition to isBefore and isUpdate. One of them is called trigger.new, and this is the list of all the objects that are being changed. In the use case we looked at, there's only one. There's only one case we're dealing with, but triggers always deal with things in sets. We never want to assume that we're only ever working on one object. What's going to happen is we'll get trigger.new, and we're going to pass that into our before update. And another thing that we're going to use, because this is an update and we want to look at the previous value of some of the fields that we're looking at, we'll pass in this thing called an old map, and I'll explain that in a little more detail in the trigger handler. And since we're passing this in to the method, we need to now modify the method to accept those. So what's happening here, again, from the trigger code, we're passing in trigger.new, which is a list of cases, and we're doing trigger.oldMap, which is a map of IDs to cases. And we can see that here in our class. We're passing in a list of cases, and here we're calling it new cases. We could call it anything, but for me, this helps me remember what they are. And then we're passing in a map of IDs to cases called old map. Now, if the concept of a map is unfamiliar, we've got another video that looks at collections and how to use them. So I won't go into too much detail on that. All right, so first step, what we're going to do is loop through the new cases that are passed in. We use a for loop, and we'll take the variable that we're going to assign to each individual case. We're going to call current case, and that'll come out of the new cases list that passed in. And what we would also like to do is take a look at the old case, so that what this case looked like before this latest update. So for that, we use the old map, and we do a get, and based on the current case's ID, that's what's going to help us fetch the old version of this case, because we want to do a comparison between what it was a minute ago and what it is now. So here's where we do our comparison. If the current case's status is not the same, if it's not equal to the old case's status, so what that means is we're filtering our logic only in the case where the status has changed. That's all we care about. And if the old case's status was new. So looking here, that means that when we're dragging it from new to working, then we care about what happens next. If we're moving it from working to escalated or escalated to closed, we don't care. It's only when we're moving from new to something else. And in that case, when we're moving it from new to something else, what we're going to do is take the current case and we're going to assign the owner ID to the user ID of whoever is currently running the system. So to use that, we use the user info object and get user ID. And we close up our curly braces, and that is our logic. And once we've saved it, we can go over to our UI and test it out. So now, if I drag this into working, it changes it to me, since I'm the user that did the modification. So that's how to write a trigger. It's a fairly simple trigger. We did get a little more complicated than we needed to by having the logic exist in another class. I could have taken this whole block here and just stuffed it here in the trigger, but that's not a good practice at all. And even in something simple like this, we might be tempted to put it right there in the trigger itself. Over time, it will grow and become really unwieldy. So it's a good habit, even if you're doing something very simple, to have a separate Apex class to do your logic, and then your trigger code is just very simple. Your trigger code is just filtering based on the conditions you need. Is it before? Is it an update? And if it is, then call before update. So your trigger code should be as simple as possible, and you reserve your complexities for the Apex class. Well, I hope this was valuable to you. I hope you learned something. If you have any questions or if anything is unclear, feel free to ask in the comments. I read all the comments on these videos. If you have an Apex problem that you're trying to solve that you haven't found a good solution for, again, feel free to let me know in the comments, and maybe I'll do a video on that. If you are new to Apex programming, feel free to check out my free mini course on Apex patterns and anti-patterns. The link to the free mini course can be found in the description of this video. You'll learn some gotchas as well as some best practices, which I think will help you on your way as you dive into this world of Apex programming. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you, and I will see you next time.